When we landed at Omaha Beach, well, it was all chaos. I mean, it was just, but we were constant under fire, constant. You try to forget all that. It's something you can't forget.
What you have just heard is an American veteran, a survivor of World War II, recounting his most intimate experiences. This is one of the many testimonies we can find from soldiers who risked their lives in a conflict that, like no other, has exposed the darkest and most sinister fibers of the human condition.
We were told, don't try to help anybody. Don't bring nobody back to the ship. Get back here as fast as you can to get another load. We gotta get manpower on the beach. The first wave I was on, and not a man survived out of that.
In the eyes of these men, one can see a deep pain, an anguish that cannot be expressed in words, because no language is enough to describe the brutality that they have found before their eyes, things that no one should ever see. In the twilight of their lives, these veterans walk among the shadows of a past that never ceases to torment them. They are more than survivors. They are the immortal souls of a war that changed the course of humanity. In this new military history video, we will meet 3 characters who have seen the face of death face to face and have returned to tell about it.
All of that water is coming in, and I know that the ship is doomed. And there were those who were coming from inside, and you could see that they were flash burned. For them trying to get out, they touch a bulkhead, they leave the skin of the hand on the bulkhead, and now they're pleading. They're out in the open now, they're pleading for help.
The Second World War, which pitted the Allied countries against those of the Axis, took place between 1939 and 1945. One of its most famous battles was Operation Overlord, known to all as the Normandy Landings, or D-Day. More than 2 million combatants from the United States and a dozen other countries took part in a military procedure of dantesque scale. The objective of the Allies was to snatch Western France from Nazi control, and in this way, gain a foothold on the European continent. The Normandy landings marked a turning point in the conflict, as they allowed the Allies to advance on land in Nazi-occupied France. The triumph of the United States and its military partners involved many casualties. It claimed the lives of more than 200,000 Allied soldiers and around 300,000 Germans. It also represented a profound rite of passage for countless young combatants.
We knew we were going into, we just didn't know when. A lot of times we would go out, stay out on board ship for 2 or 3 days. Is this going to be it or is it not? We didn't know when the real thing was going to happen. And then they told us, this is the real thing. No playing around. We landed in the 5th wave, and everybody was nervous, of course. I was in a state of grace. I don't know if you're Catholics or not, but I wasn't afraid of dying.
This veteran is Onofrio Zicari. Born in Geneva in 1923 in New York State, he is a first-generation American who says he was a shoemaker by trade and then a milkman. He was only 21 when he and his fellow soldiers in the Army's 5th Amphibious Brigade were called to invade the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944. During the landing, he took a piece of shrapnel in his knee and had to fight on, severely wounded. Zicari, or Nono, as he is often called, says that because of the absolute chaos that combat entailed for his entire battalion, his wound was never documented. Even after it became infected and another medic had to assist him, he continued to fight.
When we landed in water up to our necks, lost all our equipment. When we landed with just our rifles, that's it. We don't know who we were, we lost our outfit, we were all scattered. No, we kept saying here was, we gotta go inland, So we had to go. We landed at Omaha Beach. Well, it was all chaos. I mean, it was just But we were constant under fire. Constantly.
Omaha Beach, one of the 5 landing points for Allied troops in Normandy, was stained red. The waves washed up bodies and debris, while survivors struggled to advance on the sand, facing an enemy invisible from their fortified positions. Zicari admits that for a long time he tried to forget that day. However, he treasures the memories of the friends he made, and also those he lost at the front. The veteran recounted that on D-Day he faced death face-to-face for the first time.
See a lot of dead soldiers. A lot of dead soldiers. And you try to forget all that. With some you can't forget. This GI was sitting in a corner, and he was sitting on his helmet. He was a redhead. Never forget it. And he was holding his guts. He was just torn apart, and he was holding his guts like this. And he kept saying, "I'm going home, I'm going home, I'm going home."
This soldier was Donald Simmons, and he was the last to land in Omaha. He had barely touched the sand when he was hit by the Nazis' relentless fire and was seriously wounded. Zicari witnessed Simmons's life slipping away amid the din of combat. The veteran approached just in time to see the soldier's eyes slowly closing, reflecting the last vestiges of life. At that moment, Zicari realized that he had been forcibly transformed into a man. The war stopped at nothing.
Man, 3 days later, we had to go back and clean up the bodies and whatnot. And they used to throw the bodies up in the pickup, bring them up to the where they were going to bury them. And they were piling them on top of one another. And Father Flanagan says, "No," he says, "you lay my boys down flat, individually. You treat them, they're my boys." Every time I think about it, I get choked up.
Months later, Onofrio took part in the Battle of the Bulge, the last major Nazi offensive on December 16, 1944, when German forces launched a surprise attack on the Allies in the forested Ardennes region between Belgium and Luxembourg. Zicari also survived this merciless battle as Nazi power began to fade. Onofrio finally returned home in December 1945 as part of the demobilization of American troops following the Allied victory. A particularly emotional moment was when Zicari visited the Normandy American Cemetery and paid his respects at the grave of Donald Simmons. The publicity of this visit caught the attention of the fallen soldier's family, who lived in upstate New York, where Zicari had grown up. This led to a second trip, which took him to visit the relatives of his deceased comrade. Onofrio says that experience helped him overcome some of his wartime demons and comfort Simmons' family. At a special ceremony, the mayor of Las Vegas presented Zicari with the Purple Heart, the oldest military decoration in the United States. With humility, the veteran clarifies that he was only an infantryman, nothing more. Zicari turned 101 years old, and his stories continue to reflect the harshest side of the conflict. Now let's travel to another time and place of World War II to meet Edgar Harrell, one of the most outstanding veterans who was a member of the Marine Detachment of the American Fleet in the East.
Oh, I went through, I think, maybe 10 battle stars with them, Kwajalein. Then I was at Saipan, at Tinian, Guam, Sea Battle of Philippine Seas, where our task force shot down 403 Japanese aircraft that day. I was at Iwo Jima, and then I was at Okinawa, and it was in Okinawa that we received a Suican plane. One of his bombs went all the way through the ship, had a big gaping hole there, to the extent that we had to make our way all the way back to the States for repair.
In these intense battles, Marine Edgar Harrell earned 7 of the 10 stars awarded to the warriors of the famous cruiser USS Indianapolis. Born in Kentucky in 1924, Harrell always knew he was destined to be a Marine. In 1943, he enlisted for World War II. and by early 1944 he was already aboard that iconic ship, which later transported a key cargo for the war, which we will reveal later. As Harold mentions, during his stay in Okinawa, the cruiser was hit by a Japanese kamikaze, which forced them to return to San Francisco for the ship to be repaired. During this time, a large container was loaded into the hold, of which few people knew its mysterious contents. The ship set sail for Tinian, an island 2,400 kilometers from Japan, on July 16, 1945, delivered the cargo and headed for Guam, an important American base in the Pacific Ocean. Although the captain had requested an escort, they were assured that it was not necessary, but they made a serious mistake. There were Japanese submarines watching the area, led by Commander Hashimoto, who was stealthily following the advance of the USS Indianapolis, planning an attack against the ship.
She fired 6 torpedoes, and that first torpedo not knowing what it was, but I knew that something happened up there. I could see all of that water and that flame going high in the air. And then maybe 2 seconds later, another one hit under the number 2 turret, the big 8-inch guns. And then I could see that about 30 feet wide and about 30 feet of that bow of that ship, it's not there. All of that water is coming in, and I know that the ship is doomed.
As Harold clung to the railing, staring out at the oil-stained water, he prayed desperately. As he jumped into the sea, he felt God reassure him, "I will not abandon you." He entered the water feet first and swam toward a group of about 80 survivors. There he found 2 Marines. One of them was Leland Hubbard, a new recruit picked up at Pearl Harbor, whose encounter Harold would never forget, but more on that later. Meanwhile, the Marines had a tragic view of what was happening on the ship.
For them trying to get out, they touch a bulkhead, they leave the skin of the hand on the bulkhead, and now they're pleading. They're out in the open now, they're pleading for help, but there's nothing that this Marine corporal, could do.
That first night they lost several men, but there was another terrible threat surrounding the surviving soldiers. At dawn, they saw fins circling. They were sharks. The Marines formed a protective circle, trying to keep everyone together, but some men moved away. A blood-curdling scream filled the air. When a body suddenly surfaced, it was clear that it no longer had legs, or only its torso left. By the second day, the survivors were desperate for water. They were warned not to drink from the sea, as it could drive them mad. Still, some succumbed, and within hours, their minds began to deteriorate. By the end of the day, the group had dwindled to just 40 men. By the third day, only 17 remained alive, including Harold. Many bodies floated around them, already unrecognizable. They miraculously found 5 sailors clinging to a raft with extra life jackets. Harold and the rest of the soldiers joined them. They found a box of potatoes floating in the water, and although they were half rotten, they still managed to survive a little longer. That night, they met up with other survivors, Lieutenant McKissick and 5 other soldiers. At dawn on the 4th day, Harold and McKissick had lost the raft and the rest of their group. No one was looking for them anymore. Then they spotted a plane thousands of feet above the ground. They screamed and waved their arms frantically. The pilot noticed the oil slick and debris and radioed the base. A plane finally arrived on the scene and they were rescued. Harold was covered in oil. Doctors gave him a kerosene bath to remove his contaminated skin and then wrapped him in Vaseline gauze. At a hospital in Guam, Admiral Raymond Spruance personally awarded Harold the Purple Heart, a distinction given to members of the armed forces who have been wounded or killed in combat. It was then that he learned the true nature of the cargo they were carrying. It was nothing more and nothing less than uranium, among other materials that would later make up the first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Of the 1,197 men aboard the USS Indianapolis, only 317 survived those agonizing hours, which turned into long days. Harold had endured the terrible attack by Japanese forces for 4 days in shark-infested waters. As we mentioned previously, in the midst of all that, there was a tragic moment that the veteran could never forget, when he saw Private Leland Hubbard die in his arms.
and he was not in my squad, so I didn't know him, but I could tell that he was wounded desperately, but he was dying, and I held on to him. He died really in my arms there.
Harold came to understand that sometimes in war the easiest option is to die, but he chose to survive. He had something to hold on to: his family and a girlfriend named Ola May, who had promised to wait for him. Upon his return, they married, and their marriage lasted 71 years. Decades after the conflict ended, Harold received a call asking if he knew Hubbard. Although the name was unfamiliar to him, when he was sent a photograph, he burst into tears. He realized it was the Marine he had been with in his final minutes of life. This information brought some peace to the fallen soldier's family. The Marine documented his experiences in a book he co-authored with his son David, titled From the Deep. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis, which killed 880 sailors and Marines, remains one of the worst disasters in U.S. naval history. The event has inspired numerous books and films, including a famous monologue in the 1975 feature film Jaws. The wreckage of the ship was discovered at the bottom of the North Pacific Ocean in August 2017. During his participation in the conflict, Harold had earned the rank of sergeant. Unfortunately, no plane came to pick up his mail, so official recognition was delayed for 75 years. In 2018, he was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal and received an honorary promotion to the rank of sergeant. Harold was the last surviving Marine from the USS Indianapolis. He lived at the Clarksville Veterans Home in the state of Tennessee until his death at the age of 96 on May 8, 2021. Now, to meet our last protagonist, we must go back to a cold December morning in 1941, where veteran Sherwin Callender faced a tragic day. In his own words, it was the worst disaster he had ever seen. The soldier, born on June 4, 1920, in Vancouver, Canada, grew up in California and enlisted in the Navy in 1939. He often joked that he made this decision because he was told he would have a girl in every port. Callender was stationed at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked, although he had left port just the day before. The young soldier was returning from Wake Island when his ship encountered a Japanese aircraft carrier. Unexpectedly, the enemy ship let them through, not wanting to spoil the macabre surprise they had in store for him. The next day, his ship docked at Pearl Harbor, and what he witnessed there was something he would never forget.
When we pulled into Pearl Harbor, I'd never seen such a mess in my life. I've even had to pull bodies out of the water. One that gets me so bad that I'll never forget. I reached out, grabbed him by the hair, started to lift his body out. He was slipping. I reached over and grabbed his arm, and the meat just come right off the bone.
On December 7th, 1941, a pall of darkness fell over the serene morning at Pearl Harbor, which became the scene of one of the most audacious and brutal acts of aggression in history. The sky became a chaotic ballet of destruction as hundreds of Japanese warplanes descended on the unsuspecting American fleet. The harbor was transformed into an inferno. Battleships that once symbolized American naval dominance were razed, their mighty hulls reduced to smoking wrecks. Among others, the iconic battleship USS Arizona, a titan of steel, was torn apart in a matter of seconds. The air was thick with the acrid stench of burning oil and the deafening roar of bombs and gunfire. Sailors and soldiers caught in the maelstrom struggled desperately to survive amid the chaos, their valiant efforts juxtaposed against the onslaught. Callender was one of them, and that experience showed him the true horrors of combat. The tragic hell of Pearl Harbor would become a rallying cry that propelled the United States into global conflict. The echo of that day's devastating assault would resonate through time, symbolizing both the tragedy and the indomitable spirit of a nation that woke up overnight and became part of World War II. This takes us back to June 6, 1944, the Utah beach landings on D-Day. Another brutal experience that Sherwin Callender lived through, and he recounts it as follows.
The first wave I was on, and not a man survived out of that. we had over 100 feet of clear beach, maybe close to 200, before you could get any shelter. And the Germans was up on the hills, bombarding us. For at least 10 feet, the water was just blood red. And bodies all over. We even dropped that gate down on top.
KlLLED spoke openly about his time in the Navy, especially about the day he pulled the bodies of his fallen comrades from the waters of Pearl Harbor after the 1941 attack. He gave this advice to anyone who would listen. Always remember Pearl Harbor and never ever let it happen again. After the war, he served as a scoutmaster for many years, imparting values, morals, and skills to young people. KlLLED's sense of duty never wavered. When the Gulf War broke out in 1990, he tried to re-enlist at age 70. He wanted to volunteer and, to his disappointment, was not accepted this time. He believed it was crucial for younger generations to understand what the military had been through and the sacrifices they had made. He often said in interviews that in order to learn from their mistakes, young people have to know what soldiers went through and how many died. That is why the veteran spreads the most brutal side of war at every opportunity. KlLLED had a simple message to honor veterans. Whenever you see one, go up to them. Their chests will swell a little when you shake their hand and say thank you. He believed that a small gesture of thanks could mean the world to someone who had served their country. He finally returned home safely in October 1945. Sherwin married his second wife, Margaret Eggers KlLLED, in 1980. He became an integral part of her family, enjoying life with her 4 children and 10 grandchildren. After Margaret passed away in 2006, he moved to Alabama, where he was adopted by many locals who came to see him as a father figure. He cherished this role and was proud to be a part of their lives. In 2014, he began visiting significant places from his past, such as Normandy and Pearl Harbor, with his granddaughter Elaine Oakes. These trips attracted media attention, and during the last years of his life, KlLLED enjoyed some notoriety. His positive attitude, cheerful nature, and penchant for jokes endeared him to many. He often said that his goal was to make someone laugh every day. On July 25, 2022, KlLLED passed away at the age of 102. Before his death, he was believed to be the oldest Pearl Harbor survivor in his county. His online obituary is filled with tributes. One user wrote, "I was so happy to meet a hero like him. I am so grateful for what this great man has done for us. Thank you so much for your courage, your strength, and your bravery. We will never forget you, Mr. KlLLED." As we have seen, Onofrio Zicari, Edgar Harrell, and Sherwin KlLLED are some of the survivors of hell. For them, peace was a mirage, a promise that faded every time they closed their eyes. They tried to build a new life, but always somewhere in the back of their minds, combat was waiting for them, lurking, ready to drag them back into the abyss. These veterans were among the last witnesses of an era that murdered the innocence of thousands of soldiers and left wounds that will never heal. With every breath, with every heartbeat, the past came back to them, reminding them that war, for those who live through it, never really ends. This is how another military history video ends. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.